a pillar, like literally a physical pillar of the community, like we're building and built upon 8 years of work. Like that building's going to last well beyond anybody on this Zoom call right now. And I want to be the guy, I want to be like the old guy that's like 90 sitting in the corner and somebody say, I think old head used to work here. That will tell me that there have been generations of human beings, generations of young black and brown children and families that have come through that center.
Welcome to the Race to Social Justice, a podcast that explores the myriad racial and social challenges facing the modern world, with your hosts, Kiva White and John Kepner. Thank you for being part of the courageous conversation, because when it comes to combating social injustices in America, it is not about being confrontational. It is about being conversational.
Hello, John.
Hey, Kiva.
Well, welcome. I'm doing well. Welcome, everyone, to our Race to Social Justice podcast series. I am Kiva White, the black guy.
And I'm John Kepner, the white guy. And Kiva and I share a love of the letter K. K for Kiva, K for Kepner, and K for knowledge, what we try to impart in these podcasts, something that Kiva calls the K factor.
Yes, that's right, John, the K factor. It is. And, you know, the goal of our podcast is really to promote racial and social equity and justice through honest and even sometimes difficult dialogue. And these are conversations that John and I have dubbed courageous conversations. And we have found over the years that these discussions amongst ourselves have deepened our respective understandings of racism and our personal responsibilities in that regard. And that had led us to, invite other guests to come in and share their honest experiences and learnings. And we really hope that these conversations will help our listeners, as well as our viewers, and even our guests in their own personal journeys around race, social justice issues. So, John, who are our guests today? Who do we have on the show today?
Well, the genesis of this podcast starts with an organization called Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative. Kenny and I have known each other for probably 7-8 years as fellow board members of PYSC, which is an umbrella organization that supports youth sports in Philadelphia. And I have this unbelievable respect for Kenny. When I first met him, I thought it was Kenny Holdsman, the pitcher, but he corrected the spelling and it's oriented me towards basketball, not baseball. But Kenny and I share at least two things in common besides our being fellow members of this board. One is that we're both reformed lawyers. We practiced law for a while, and then we saw the light and went into different directions. And the second is the shared import to both of us of racial justice. And as you'll hear when we ask Kenny to talk about his origin story, that it goes deep into his DNA. And so we've shared that common bond. And Kenny suggested that we also invite for this podcast Ameen Akbar. Ameen is the chief mission officer for Philadelphia Youth Basketball, which Kenny helped found and is the president of, and has done just amazing things in the time that I've known Kenny. And I'm going to borrow from the website description of Ameen to introduce you, Ameen, because I think it's not just, went to school here, went to school there. It tries to capture the essence of you, and it might be a good way to, kick off our question to you. But it says, Philadelphia born and raised, and yes, on the playground is where he spent most of his days. This fact isn't just relegated to a fictional character who moved from Philadelphia to Bel Air, called Fresh Prince, but it was real life. It was where he learned the essence of what it looks like for a group of people with shared values to live, persevere, thrive, and create community. It propelled a 25-year career in social work and education. The journey to this point has been a spiritual one and filled with purpose. Ameen's work spans the human relations spectrum from coach to educator to school administrator. Throughout his career, Ameen has provided direct service to youth-facing practitioners, and youth-serving agencies through support services, professional development, that word coaching again, and organizational culture. He has led organization-wide initiatives that have been transformative to the overall culture of organizations. He has been able to translate his expertise in restorative practices, trauma-informed care, and youth development to practical, strategic use in schools, organizations, and relationship development. And when I read that, I now knew why Kenny got to you to be the chief mission officer. And by the way, he's a Penn State Nittany Lion and was in business administration and management degree, and was captain of the Penn State Abington campus basketball team when he was there, right around
many moons ago.
Right around the corner from where I live. Now, Kenny, Kenny's description could go on for a couple of pages, but I'm going to read what the website says because it just similarly captures him, I think. As a seasoned nonprofit leader with significant local and national content experience in areas of positive youth development, youth leadership, and civic engagement, youth sports, and urban school reform, Kenny has devoted the past 2 decades of his career to the empowerment of young people. And boy, is that really palpable in him, especially lower income kids of color, through education, leadership, and character development, coaching and mentorship, family involvement, and high quality opportunities both in schools and in the community. He has held senior positions in the School District of Philadelphia, the Academy for Educational Development, a global nonprofit, and 2 local sports-based youth development organizations, one of which is Philadelphia Youth Basketball. And he went to Lehigh and got his law degree at Temple, right? So there you go. So that's my introduction. I could go on and on, but I'm eager to hear you guys talk. So, Eva, you want to take it from there?
See, Kenny, I knew we had something in common. I didn't know you was an owl. I knew there was a good connection there, good brother. That's good to hear.
Other than Cheltenham High School, Kiva, it is my proudest educational affiliation.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, welcome to you both, Ameen and Kenny. And let's start with you. Let's start by sharing a little bit about your childhood growing up, where you lived, your parents, what you did as a kid. Just give us a little bit of background of who Ameen Akbar is.
Yeah, I in that intro, I always use that to play off of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's narrative and Will Smith's narrative, but it legitimately was the foundation for me. I'm an uptown boy. I spent every day on the playground, Dorothy Emanuel Recreation Center, and I paid attention and watched people like my father create community every day in the 80s and 90s. And he was a steward of many communities and neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia. And I wanted to be that. I was very much the definition of the village raising the kid, even with really quality, caring, supportive mother and father. They were the neighborhood parents. They were the block parents. And I got a chance to immerse in that. I kind of, I was an only child. So like I found family outside of the 3 of us in the house. And it spoke to my soul. It spoke to my spirit to watch the amount of people take to my parents, take to the other adults in the community, watch adults in the community work full-time jobs, but come home after work to create community in that recreation center. And that spoke to my soul, guys. And it propelled, we overuse the word like life's work, but it's really a part of my mission. It's a part of my ministry to do. And, I'd also add, about my parents, my parents came out of the 60s and 70s and, they came out of the Black Power movement. And, I grew up in a household where it was a privilege to be Black, right? And Black was beautiful and it was celebrated and you weren't on the margin. I wasn't on the margin in my neighborhood, and then when I, sort of like left the neighborhood and went to school outside of the neighborhood, I didn't have the words in the 80s and 90s, but I know the words now, but I felt like I was on the margin or, you felt like you weren't as celebrated. This term authenticity, we didn't feel like we could be ourselves. So interesting sort of like childhood growth, school, but yet, and humanity always spoke to me. So I was able to carry both. And I think at my best because of how I was raised with mom, pop, and the neighborhood that was the village, being able to carry Black being beautiful and being proud, and then also respecting humanity and how diverse humanity is how I would sum up how I grew up. And, sometimes it's gymnastics to go back and forth between those worlds as you develop through adolescence and adulthood. But that's how I would describe, myself growing up.
Wow.
You mentioned a change. And did that occur in middle school, high school, college? Where did you first sense that change in attitude?
I would say I started to pay attention to it in ninth grade. Middle school was great. I went to an all-Black middle school up until seventh grade. Then I went to one of the better academic public schools that pulled everybody. One of the magnet schools that pulled everybody from the city, and still was in a protective cocoon in seventh and eighth grade. But when I got to ninth grade, the classes got smaller, and I think those were my first memories of like I don't know if I'm as protected educationally. I was protected athletically. I was protected, with our own social group. But I think around the time ninth grade, I didn't have the language for it. However, but I did feel on the margin, at least academically. And then by the time I got to Penn State, it was Ogons at the time. I was on a team and it was only 3 Black players. But then that's where, I would say like me being proud of who I was, and then walking with what I think spiritually and with humanity, who I am, I started to gain a lot of acceptance from folks across the spectrum in terms of race, class, gender. And again, I didn't have that language then, but I started to notice that folks were attracted to, again, what I call my spirituality, my humanity. Then, but it was always a challenge to highlight my Blackness, and then also, be in a space where folks see me as a human being. Also, that I would say I first recognized some of those things, and even have to play that dual role sometimes.
Okay. Well,
that if I had some do-overs, I would do over differently, considering I'm a lot more confident than I was.
Right.
I was in a statement on the margin. I never thought about that, that as a like a mental I guess paradigm to about growing up with in a communal environment, and you never this whole term marginalization, marginalized youth. I never realized, I never thought about how it's great that you were able to accept that you didn't see yourself on the margin, because words really have a tendency to describe us and has a tendency to kind of mold us into, predetermined roles and stuff like that. And it kind of carves out our future existence if we really embrace it. Because I never, for me, my word was minority. I just never felt like I was less, like a minority.
Kiva, you speaking my language now, fam. I struggle with that word. Struggle with that word.
Yeah. So yours is marginalized. Mine was minority, and I still to this day I don't subscribe to that. But facts. We're together on that. Yeah. John.
Well, for contrast, let's hear about your origin story, Kenny.
Sure. So I probably grew up about 3 miles or so north of where Ameen did. I grew up in Elkins Park in Cheltenham to 2 parents who had a real tradition of service. It wasn't an activist household, but there was a real sense of both service and also disparity. So my mom spent a career in the Philadelphia School District, both as a teacher and then as a guidance counselor. And my dad was a mid-level government guy, worked for HUD and did housing urban development in a bunch of different communities. And the neighborhood that I was in, and the school, I was a public school kid, K to 12. It was almost idyllic is the word that I would use to describe it, insofar as there was authentic diversity of race, ethnicity, religion, economic circumstance, all that. So I was kind of a middle class Jewish kid in a community where there was a new immigrant Korean community, very upwardly mobile, a Black working class, middle class, and upper middle class community, a white working class community in the Cheltenham Village, and then there was sort of like a middle class and an upper middle class Jewish community. And those lines didn't really mean much, especially if you played ball. So, my friend group was really diverse, really integrated. Basketball was, primarily Black guys. And there was a real sense, and I'm taking a lot when I hear Ameen describe his community and the role that his father played as steward of the community. I almost felt like, the way I think Dr. King describes the beloved community. People cared for one another. They looked after each other. What your station in life was far less important than your humanity and your character and the way you treated other people. And that stuck with me in a big way. And then my mom oftentimes would bring students home, whether it was a dinner, a weekend, a week. And it was then that I got to understand a little bit about disparity. So I thought, wow, my visit to Simon Gratz High School, and I learned this term in law school in a DSEG education law class. It was a racially isolated school. So overwhelmingly, Black students, somewhere around the poverty line to a bit above. And I thought to myself, the students that my mom was bringing home, they didn't have near the opportunity that I did, socially, academically, athletically. And I was like, I don't know, a mile and a half on the other side of Cheltenham Avenue. So that sense of disparity, race, class, power, privilege, although I wouldn't have used those words in my adolescence, I really knew early on that there was a profound difference between my circumstance and that of others.
So how did that background lead you to where you are today, and segue that into what you're doing today?
Mm-hmm. So I went to Lehigh, as John mentioned, and I discovered that the overwhelming majority of the student body was white and was very interested in using the educational experience for pre-professional purposes. It was not a learning for learning's sake, stay up late at night and talk about the issues of the day and the world. It was about, how is one going to take their rightful place in the economy and to earn a really significant living. I sort of cut the other way, and I was interested in urban studies and government and politics and economics. So after going 0 for 8 in on-campus interviews to go to New York in the late 80s and do the Wall Street banking thing, I went to DC and discovered I was really interested in the public policy of economics, not the money and banking stuff. And I spent 4 years working on Capitol Hill, doing education, labor, national and community service work, the founding underpinnings of AmeriCorps and all that stuff. And then at night, I ran a late night basketball program through the YMCA. Summertime was on Howard University's campus at Banneker Park, and the wintertime was at the country's first African-American YMCA called Anthony Bowen at 13th and W in the district. And it was just a really profound formative experience for me. I went to law school, did a bunch of community work in and around Temple's campus. And then I went to a law firm called Ballard Spahr. And literally the first night of work, I said, I was not born to toil in these vineyards. This is not where my passion and purpose resides. And it took me about 19 months to make a career change and to really live a life that, at least to me, felt more authentic to my values and my passions.
He's a much quicker learner. It took me 22 years.
Wow. I like how you close that out with the word passion, because Kenny, I've known you for several years now, and every time I see you it just resonates with you, your authentic passion, care, and concern for just the betterment of society, and more specifically the young people that you work with in the city of Philadelphia. And I wanted to ask you, you've really been this true champion of using sports to engage young people in the city of Philadelphia who are exposed to social disparities into this model of positive youth development. It's a programmatic model, and it's used across the nation. Can you speak a little bit about that model in terms of how you use it to engage young people in the city?
Sure. So I think, for starters, it's a great context for learning and youth development and community building. But at PYB, we've really used it as maybe the greatest door opener.
Oh, and Kenny, I'm sorry, before you get into, and on the heels of that, tell us about what led you to co-found PYB with Eric Worley. So tie it into that. Yeah, thank you.
I will. Yeah, I mean, I think that sport is it is a real binding force, and I think that when people engage in sport together, it may, Kiva, be the ultimate meritocracy and the ultimate stage for building human relationships. In that, when you get into a gym, it doesn't really matter, whether your parents went to college or not. It doesn't matter whether you have money in your bank account, whether you go to an underfunded inner city school or some fancy preparatory school on the main line. Like, all of that stuff becomes irrelevant. And if you are a good player, a good teammate, a good person, there's room for you. So I really like that notion. When I was at Legacy, started out as Arthur Ashe, Eric approached me maybe 2 years in, and he was the first of a number of people whom I have great respect for, who shared virtually the same narrative, Kiva. It went like this. We see all these amazing organizations popping up, built around alternative sports like tennis and squash and rowing and equestrian and cycling. And you're here at Arthur Ashe, you've got a $15 million center, a professionalized organization, an on-court, off-court program, a lot of people of color, especially Black men, in positions of leadership on the board and on the staff. But if we really want to reach a lot of kids at great scale, the lowest cultural barrier to entry and lowest economic barrier to entry sport of any in this city is basketball, because it's iconic, especially in our city's Black community. And if you believe that the cultural relatability of coach mentors and staff and all that is important for the relationship building and the role modeling with coach mentors, there's no greater reservoir of human talent in our city than men and women who came up in the game of basketball in lower income communities, who care deeply about pouring into young people to help to lift them up to be great. So that was the narrative. and I believed in it wholeheartedly. So Eric and I and Alvin Williams and Doug Young and a guy named Steve Rosenberg noodled on a concept paper in 2014.
Wow.
And then we began shopping it late 14, early 15. And the overwhelming consensus among, different leaders in the basketball community, the K-12 and the higher ed community, the philanthropic community, and the youth development community was, yeah, there's something to this idea of building a program, an organization, and a center that would have the ability to really leverage this iconic game of basketball, where if we put enough of the right program elements around basketball and enough positive, well-trained, capable coach mentors in the lives of young people and build a center that could be a physical space that was safe and robust and had a lot of youth centricity to it and opportunities, that we might be able to do transformation at a big level. And Kiva, you and I both know, like, that word transformative or transformation, we do not use that word casually or flippantly. It is the holy grail of the work, because it really means that it is so powerful that it enables young people to fundamentally change the trajectory of their own lives.
Yeah. I mean, I think sports, particularly basketball, is transformative in so many ways. When I was growing up, I used, I played ball in high school, and I played in college D3. And for me, it was what I call today knowing what they were doing with the coaches and the whole process of being in the gym and being around other kids from different communities and neighborhoods, it was socialized discipline for me. It was a way to get me to calm my hot head and just be around other people that was different than me and be cool with that. And so it is transformative in the way we think and the way we behave. I'm talking about young people growing up around so much disparity, seeing so much crime, and to be able to kind of it's transformative and it's transitional at the same time, because you transition out of that those negative aspects of being, when you're in the gym, you're around positivity, you're around coaching, you're around support, and that's a big part of human development. So I socialized discipline for me was how I viewed the basketball gym in the course. And the irony too, Kenny, is street ball takes kids off the street, and so I think it's a powerful social justice tool, and you guys are just doing a great job at it.
It takes a lot of time, effort, networking, and so forth to build a new facility.
Mm-hmm.
But what I observed, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Kenny, from a leadership standpoint, is you built programs first. You built programs in the community as you were conceiving of and funding and then building the new center, so that it wasn't just the center. You applied all the other things that you were talking about. And part of that is, recruiting the right people.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to turn to Ameen, and what's the background behind your recruitment to support Philadelphia youth basketball? And what does chief mission officer mean in your organization?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And why that term?
Yeah, I really fascinating journey, and I called it like another pillar in my life. What I described how I grew up, that's a pillar. Those things are like the anchors to the things that I truly believe in. And I guess it's close to 2 years ago, approaching, I got a call from somebody who I went to high school with, Kathy Lindsay. Her and I went to Masterman together, and she was on the board. She's on our board at PYB. She said, hey, Ameen, do you know Kenny Holdsman? And I was like, I know the name. I don't know him personally, but I know the name. She's like, there's something there. You all just need to talk. And she said, I'm going to relay the message to Kenny, and you guys can sync up. I don't know for what reason, but you all should just talk. I had just finished up about 14 years at Youthville, Philadelphia Charter School, where the least fascinating thing about our young people was that they had dropped out or pushed out of school. But the fascinating thing is that they were 18, 19, 20-year-old eager adults trying to get a second chance at a diploma, service in the community, and a trade. And I really cut my teeth there and built up a new community that felt like the neighborhood I came from. And I had spent 14 years there, had wonderful graduates, but also deeply cut by, I lost 24 young people in 14 years. And 20 out of those 24 died violently. So I was frontline, and I had to take a break. And then I transitioned to do like some consultant work, and and then the pandemic hit. So this conversation was like, it was pulling me. And Kenny and I sat at a coffee shop on Wayne Avenue, and it was the most fruitful conversation that I'd had in years. It was conversation like this conversation is. Kenny brought up things that were unprompted, that I felt like, we talked about race, we talked about class, we talked about gender, we talked about Philadelphia, we talked about basketball, we talked about all of those things. And it was a conversation over coffee and tea. And I had already known a little bit about PYB. Eric Worley's a couple of years older than me, but like we're from the same era. So I'd known some of the good work that was happening. I didn't know it was happening at that rate. And that sparked a series of conversations where, Kenny's like, hey, we are building this wonderful facility that I think fits at all of the intersections that you care about. Yeah, I don't see a future if somebody like you is not in there. And I took that to heart. And it was like, listen, from our conversation, I am in, Kenny. Like, I want to be a part of what this is, because not just your physical building, but you said this, John, like the programming and people that were responsible for delivering the programming was the thing. I visited our I Am Because We Are program, and that's our older youth program, all young men, high school age, and a large part of our population are young men who were diverted away from additional engagement in the criminal justice system. Low-level offense, diverted to a program, and I saw the coach mentors in the adults developing those authentic relationships, and it reminded me of the neighborhood I grew up in. It reminded me of the Sunny Hill League. It reminded me of all of these great coaches that I had. And, the health and safety of young people is always directly tied to the adults in their life. I don't care what study you read. I don't care how you slice it. If the adults are healthy, the young person is going to be healthy. And man, when I saw what the adults were doing, with young people and how, they were engaged, I was like, I need to be a part of this. I want to be a part of this. And we came up with the title of Chief Mission Officer, and a lot of it fit mission work, ministry work for me. Like, really, what are our values, right? Like the words, and then how are the words lived out every day in culture, every day in human interaction, every day in relationship building. And then there was this merge of really looking at mission and how do we live that out every day through what we value, and we call that like the PYB way. And that's emerging. Like, this is the way that we do things. And some of that is the program side of the house. I work with some wonderful folks. I certainly inherited 8 years of really good programming and people. So the program side of the house is where I mainly work with. And then on our senior level as the Chief Mission Officer, Kenny, myself, Julia, and Jason, with helping build the organization as well, because we're building an organization and we're building a center at the same time is how I would answer that question, John.
I keep hearing terms like ministry and spiritual and things like that. Is your approach informed by religion, or is it? Am I misreading that?
No, you're not misreading it, but I would say it's not the only thing that it's guided by. So I was born Muslim, raised Muslim, and the culture of Islam, and particularly the Black community across the country, and it's really, really unique in Philadelphia, that impacts culture and subculture in the Black community. Like, young people, I've always had an authentic relationship with young people. And again, every time somebody reads a little bit of a bio, I always sort of take a deep breath and say, as long as young people and community members vouch for me, the words mean something that were written. And I've always felt that, okay, good. That's who I honor, right? And if they don't vouch for me, then those words don't mean much. And, being Black and being Muslim as another identity is very much rooted in a cultural, big culture, and also a cultural subset in Philadelphia. Like, a kid's gonna look at me and be like, "Oh, you look like my uncle," or "You look like my cousin," or "You look like my, the bald head guy with beards." Philly is known for beards, and that beard is rooted, specifically in the Black community, is rooted in the Muslim community. And there's a badge of honor to grow your beard and all of those things. And it's also religious as well. So I would say, yes, part religion. But again, the sort of humanity part are all of the things, and then this is in Islam too, are the things that transcend. And again, I didn't have that language then, but I will always question what my leadership role is. Why are young people taking to me? Why are people taking to me? And I will always be self-reflective of that, because that's the thing that I had to honor. And the moments that I was not honoring that meant that I didn't do the kind of self-reflection to keep that, and I've always been in the position of being a leader, or somebody considered me a leader, probably from 7th grade on. And I've tried to honor that. And again, I think I was groomed for it all. It's not, I know I was groomed for it unintentionally, because those folks who I looked up to had really great character.
I think that's awesome. That's the human connection, and particularly with young Black males, is they need to see positive, strong male role models in their community. And you mentioned the word about a healthy adult is instrumental in a child, a young person's life. I always say it's the number one protective factor, in my opinion. And normally I would say a child needs a caring, nurturing, and responsible adult. And as a result of this conversation, I'm going to add in healthy mind, body, soul, and spirit in order to guide young people effectively. And my hats off to the both of you, because I believe that you are doing that. Your staff is doing that. I have opportunities to interact with your staff, and they all have the same sense of passion to see these young people strive. I was really impressed with the entrepreneurial program that you all did. The celebration where the young people were competing for scholarships to do, an entrepreneurial venture, like stuff like that, just teaching them how to sustain, be economically self-sufficient. And all of those things are just so positive that you all are doing with the round ball, just using basketball as kind of like the glue to get these young people engaged and connected. And that's, it's really awesome. And I wanted to ask you, Kenny, if we can go a little bit deeper to share a little bit about how your programs have had a positive impact around towards young people, and what are the goals for your new Alan Horwitz 6-man center? Give us a little backdrop of that.
Sure. So 2 programs that I want to talk about in a human way, an anecdotal way. So you had brought up the youth entrepreneurship program, and long 15-week boot camp, young people developing businesses out of a product or service that they wanted to bring to the marketplace. And really good program. Randy Butler, who Christian Diaz on our staff team. They directed the work. And I showed up at the end for this closing Shark Tank ceremony, panel of sharks or judges. And the boy that won, Nasir Powell from Simon Gratz High School, is building a business called Cookies Lawn Care, lawn, landscaping, cleanup, snow removal. And when it was announced that he was the winner, there was this audible like shriek of joy from his mom, his siblings. He had one or two school teachers or counselors from Gratz there. And my takeaway from that, Kiva, was that this young man had distinguished himself as an entrepreneur, as a wealth builder, as a business owner, was employing cousins in his business and was going to really be able to scale that up. And he got $10,000 of investment capital and a business coach. When we talk about young people having the supports, exposures, abilities to self-determine, what we really mean by that is that a young person can set goals and dreams and actually go achieve them and actualize those for him or herself. And that was one example of a program that, although it was only in its pilot phase, we're going to do a lot more of that. And a lot of the economic opportunity will be connected to us and the co-located operating partners who join us in the center to bring programming to life. Second instance, Ameen had mentioned the I Am Because We Are program. And it's led right now by a really gifted youth development professional named Zori Stone. And she and Ak had worked together for a number of years at Youth Build Philadelphia Charter School. And I come in one night, and unfortunately, because I've needed to, be out there touring people through the center and constantly fundraising, I really haven't had a chance to immerse in programming much at all the last 2 years. And I come into the James Wright Rec Center at 34th and Haverford, and Ak and Zori have the young people in kind of a learning circle, facilitative circle. And there's 2 or 3 of the other coach mentors, about 15 or 16 young people, and then some guests from the city government. And the question, I think, was a Tupac quote. I will remember it more literally, but it went something like this: if you don't receive positive energy and support from your circle, that your circle is a cage, something along those lines. And then there was this
Nipsey Hussle quote. Nipsey Hussle quote.
Nipsey, yes.
Nipsey, yep, Nipsey.
Wow.
My bad on that, but it was grist for the mill for a really rich conversation. About maybe halfway through, all of a sudden, the visitor from the city government, probably a guy my age, maybe a couple years younger, looks across the circle and identifies Coach Basir as somebody who he taught in middle school. And they get up and they move toward the middle of the circle, and in front of everybody, they have a long embrace. And I knew it was powerful. And afterwards, Ak broke it down for me that for young teenage boys trying to figure out what masculinity and love and credibility and relationships look like, to see Coach Basir, their coach mentor, receive love and an embrace from a former teacher of his, and they openly hugged, it was amazing. And Ak said, it's the adults in the room. We're going to have 100,000 square foot center loaded with program elements, basketball plus, youth multimedia, mental wellness, physical therapy, healthy foods, financial empowerment, jobs, the list goes on. But at the end of the day, we're only going to be as good as the adults who are engaging with young people and the culture that is established and kept. And I would say, my aha moment sitting at Ultima Coffee Shop with Ameen a couple years back is I said to myself, this individual is supremely talented, and at the end of the day, pouring into the people and building the culture among the adults, the young people, all that will be the single most important thing that we do to make this amazing center great.
So Kenny, it's the Alan Horwitz Sixth Man Center, right?
That's right.
So why, I understand Alan Horwitz, of course, major contribution to it, but why Sixth Man? Why is that in the name?
Mm-hmm. So the Sixth Man is his handle. It's his nickname. So he's this iconic fan of the Sixers, and he sits courtside and gets all passionate and lives it. He was a year or two behind Wilt at Overbrook.
And so he's like the sixth man.
So his nickname is the Sixth Man. It's not meant to mean that, girls and women are not a big part of our organization, and they absolutely are, but that's Alan's name.
Yeah, okay. I've been listening to you, and, I've always known it intellectually, but your stories are great to drive home a point. And, we've all had coaches. I mean, I have had a legendary football and track coach who, when I really think about it, sure, he taught me how to play football and how to run hurdles and stuff. But really the reason I still talk about him today, and my colleagues 55, almost 60 years later, still talk about him, was because of the mentoring side. And that's really the essence, I guess, of what we mean. There are different aspects of positive youth development, but we keep coming back to coaching and the value of coaching. And it's really the mentoring piece that I'm seeing as the real value piece there for the kids.
I'll add one more level to take it a level deeper, and this is the thing that I know that I've been trying to make and help others and role model the connections all the way through. There's the coach mentor, and then the values that they taught you, and then there's also an importance with saying their name, right? In traditional Black communities and traditional African-centric communities, and in all communities, really, there's a form of libations, and you speak the name of the ancestors. And what we're trying to get young people is to, and the adults, to make those connections and say those names. And I'll give you a perfect example. Kenny mentioned Zori Stone running. Zori did work for us at Youthville for a while, but Zori also was one of my players in my father's basketball league. Like, I've known her since she was 7 years old, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a connection. And I walk into the gym and somebody's like, Coach Z, Coach Z, Coach Z. So that's a connection. For that city official and to embrace Coach Bye like that is another connection that young people see, and we say the names. I talk about my father often. Well, my father played for John Chaney at Simon Gratz in 1969 and 1970. He was his basketball coach before John Chaney went to Chaney State, before he went to Temple. And he changed my father's life, and it wasn't about basketball, right? The principal at Simon Gratz then was Marcus Foster, and Marcus Foster was a leading Black male educator in the 60s and 70s, went on to become the first Black superintendent in the school district of Oakland. Kenny has a Simon Gratz connection through his mom, right? And, the deeper connection for me is because sometimes when we are with young people, with each other, we'll talk about these things as if they are happenstance, right? Or not give it the credence that it should. And we attach the name and the value. So then, therefore, everybody can take it with them. And what I tell young people all the time, whether you didn't meet Marcus Foster, you didn't meet John Chaney, but the words you are getting from me, the values you are getting from me, come directly from John Chaney and Marcus Foster, because they spoke life into my father, who spoke life into me, right? Is always the intentionality sort of like kick that I've been on the last 2 or 3 years. So I ask young people, like, if you're going to tell me that shit, again, old head is culturally is a affirming term. When somebody call you old head here in Philly, it's like, oh, I made it. You know, who's your OG? Let's name them. What did they teach you? You know, because certainly with young people, certainly when we turn on news and media, we hear everything that's wrong about everything associated with young people, culture, and we try to create that space to be able to say, like, let's name some of those people. And again, in traditional African-centric spaces, you know, you walk into that space and you speak the name of an ancestor to keep name alive, and then to also keep the values that you create. I just wanted to make some of those connections on there because
that's good.
That's really good.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it's not happenstance, you know.
I would add that it's Coach Carter, it's Coach whoever.
Yeah.
You know, the term is a term of reverence, respect, you know, kind of thing, and it's all, you know, I'm glad you took it to a different level. That's really, really good.
I think the value that Ameen was talking about is paramount. And one of the things that we cannot lose sight of is the concept of fatherlessness that a lot of these young men and young women oftentimes face. And the coach can be the number one reflection of a positive male role model in that young person's life. And I just think combating this concept of fatherlessness through sports is just a powerful way to keep kids on the positive. And that's why I like the positive youth development model, because using sports to positively develop young people, because you're replacing through the coach mentor, a huge important aspect of the developmental factors is having, you know, both parents in their lives. And coaches play, you know, oftentimes play pseudo parental roles. And I just think that's extremely instrumental from a developmental standpoint. So I just wanted to put that out there, that you guys are just not only you know, preserving culture and values, but you're also really maximizing the developmental aspect of a lot of our young people in the absence of in their homes, where, you know, fathers are absent within the homes. So just wanted to put that out there, and kudos to you all for doing that.
Kiva, I want to build on that point for a minute, if I could.
Sure, yeah.
That a lot of us talk about social capital or community capital and things of that sort. And I've always believed in it. I thought Bob Putnam and Bowling Alone did a great job of quantifying that from a economic perspective. One of the things that we have found in building a high social capital organization with people from neighborhoods and industry sectors across the city and region is that we are sitting on a treasure trove of social capital. And one of the ways that we have begun to tap into that is the idea of work-based learning experiences for young people that are tied to their interests and their curiosities. And there was an author who wrote a book a few years back called Making It. Author's name is Stephanie Malia Krauss from Chicago. And she posits that a good education is really important. But what kids also need are quality mentors in their lives. They need career exposing opportunities. And then they need, she calls them either door openers or currency builders. You know, like in a middle class home, child says, you know, I have an interest in learning how startup companies get built, or I have an interest in being a pediatrician, or I want to know what community organizing or running from elected offices. And the moment the parent hears that, particularly an empowered parent, it's really, you know, I know somebody who does that work at a pretty high level. How about if I arrange a coffee, a shadow day, an internship, right? That's door opening. It's validating. It's sponsorship. And we are beginning to do that for PYB young people. And when you have a a center and a mini campus like we do, and a lot of partners that are going to co-locate with us, and a building next door to the center, phase 2 of the project, that's going to be solely purposed for workforce development and wealth building and economic opportunity creation. We are fixated on the idea of how can the human and the physical parts of our organization be leveraged for the benefit of young people.
Yeah, I heard when you were profiling the whole center, all the different places, opportunities for the kids to go based on where their interests are. I love that concept. Now, so I hate to turn this a little bit to a huge problem, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about this, all the horrific stories we hear about violence in the city. And I know there's been some experiences in your organization, your employees, your coaches, are out in the community where this violence is occurring. I know it's intuitive, but explain maybe with some stories how positive youth development helps on the issue of violence.
Yeah, I this is at PYB, and this is also beyond PYB. I mentioned that, I lost 24 young people in 14 years.
Yeah.
So I know what it's like to get the call from mom. Some of these are my favorite human beings, just like ever. And these are not folks that have just popped up on social media, but I spent intimate moments with, like some of these young adults and their families. And, I'm a restorative practitioner, and I know what it's like to walk into a community, to have to run a restorative circle the next day after a peer, a friend, a loved one was murdered. And those are not easy moments. They're not easy moments on a facilitator. They're not easy moments on a community and parent. And but I also think about restoration always, just for being a restorative practices person, and what it means to that when a community has a void, how you help supplement and help try to make things whole, and knowing it's not an endpoint, it's a journey that doesn't have an endpoint. So you're in constant restoration, the self-work, and then also the community work. And who are those folks in community spaces? And oftentimes they are the teachers, who are the coaches, who are the mentors, who are folks that live in and with young people. So always going to go from a restorative practices framework with how you do that, and that's continual. And the second part is really practically, for the first time in IAM, we use this program, really great media agency called Love Now Media. Josh Duncan does some amazing work, and used a bit of her curriculum to help young people develop their own love story. Right. So I'm using love with that intention on love, because love is active and it's not just a word. Sometimes we throw it out, but we get them to tell their own story through a series of 15 questions. Right. So we did not start with gun violence first. We talked about image. We asked questions about images in media and the spectrum of media. We talked about what was their first, how would they define love? How would they define care? And a series of 15 questions. What's the first image that they saw, of themselves? And then by the end of those 15 questions, young people then read their answer back, and it becomes their own love story, right? And so to combat what we feel living in communities, to combat what we see, I'm talking about proximity is close, because it's my homie that I just lost yesterday, right? One of those. To combat that, we've gotten young people through this special session that I facilitated through Love Now Media, to get to tell their love story as a holistic approach to combat some of the trauma that young people are going through. It was as beautiful as that hug was between Coach Ba and the city official. You got a chance to listen to 20 young people, young high school age boys, tell their love story. And also in that love story are some instances where people that we lost. So again, practically as a restorative practices practitioner, going to always step in that space. You do more to build community. And when traumatic things happen, you rely on what you built to make it whole again. And that's a journey. And then, getting people to tell their love story are two really practical approaches that I've taken my whole career. And I've been doing restorative practices since about 2005, 2006, and particularly in schools.
Interesting.
I like that love story concept. It's very important. We always talk about your origin story here. We try to get guests to, share a little bit about the origin story. And that love story concept I think it's so powerful because it's a nice counter narrative approach to hearing that, hearing young people share what life is like for them from their own eyes and their own, their own words, and not the words or the images that are depicted in our society, on the media, and what people write about young people, and how the perceptions and stereotypes and the characterizations of young people. You all are hearing it from firsthand from these young people. And I just love that concept.
Hey, Kiva, can I hop in? I just want to say that's a salient point. Really good friend of ours, good friend of mine, Michael O'Brien.
No, Michael.
Michael's awesome. Maybe 7 years ago was like, we are not the sum total of our trauma, brother.
Yeah, man.
Right. And at some point it becomes the overselling of trauma. And those things don't have to exist in two separate spaces. We can talk about love, holistic, and also be trauma sensitive. But
right.
The only other part of trauma sensitive is to make things whole. And that's what you do in building loving communities. And that's the approach that,
I love it.
Again, I'm starting to, my language is starting to immerse and get better the last 5 or 6 years around it. And it affirmed what we've always done. It affirmed what my father was doing, and he didn't have the technical language. He used to always say, every thug want to be hugged.
Yeah.
And that became the narrative of the neighborhood. Every thug want to be hugged.
That's right.
And we would hug each other so the community could see that every day. And every time I embrace one of my brothers, a young person, there is this authentic hug when you shake hands. That is the narrative. Yep. That's the blueprint.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's powerful. I just love this concept is just taking them through these 15 questions and having them write their own narrative. We have to see resilience as a resource. And I know Michael O'Brien. He's a great guy, real powerful, doing some good big things in Philly. So it's good to see we got some like-mindedness on the show today.
So we had a visitor, 3 years ago, a gentleman named Daryl Alston built a sneaker company called Bungee Brand, and Daryl was in prison for 6 years, and towards the end of his stay, was designing a lot, was sketching pictures of sneakers. And Bernard Hopkins, the boxer, had been visiting Graterford and took a real liking to Daryl and said, when you get out, you should do something with that talent. And a couple introductions later, Daryl met 2 80-year-old white men who were sort of eclectic investors, and they became the seed funders for what became Bungee Brand. And Daryl came to visit our I Am Because We Are program, and then had the young people to his headquarters in Kensington. And one of the things Daryl said, it'll always stick with me. He said to a group of young men, I've been in your shoes, and I know what it is that you get when you're running in the streets. He said, you get community, you get currency, and you get credibility. And in my opinion, the risk reward of what it is that you're doing in the streets does not pencil out. He said, I spent 6 years in prison. Let me just debunk the myth that you come home and you're celebrated as a hero and it's some kind of glamorous stretch of your life. He said, there's nothing closer to hell than being locked up. And then he went on to say, if any of you guys would like to help me build a company, send me a note about what it is that you can contribute. And I'm very serious about hiring some of you because I need help in this enterprise. And it's a legal one and it's fast growing. And what Daryl did for me is he painted a bright line in the sand between the streets and something lawful, all built around the elements of community credibility and currency. And what he was really trying to say is that for young people who don't see the option to secure those 3 C's lawfully, they're going to get it somewhere else. And I think what our city needs to come to terms with is trauma-informed care and opportunity generation for young people to find community credibility and currency in lawful ways with mentors and employers who are going to deeply invest in their development and care about their success and believe that they are coming with real efficacy and a real ability to contribute, not that from some deficit place like they're broken and can't fly straight. And yeah, gun control, very important issue. I think we need a better cross-sector citywide policing plan among mayor and police chief and DA and university police forces. But at the end of the day, it's about sets of opportunities for people to make much more positive choices. That's kind of how I view it, John.
So today's primary election day, are the candidates talking this way? Is there hope for that kind of systemic approach?
Ameen and I had quality time, I think, with most every primary candidate and even some secondary ones. Mm-hmm. They will talk this language and engage with us in quiet conversation. I don't think it's what they're selling on their TV commercials and their stump speeches.
Yeah.
Because what is selling right now is more law and order. And I get why that's the prevailing, talk track and message that you hear from most candidates. I don't disagree with it. It is a both and with the kinds of things that we're creating with and for young people.
And John, I would add, from my perspective, I'm not going to put every amount of stock in the 6 debates that I saw, the intimate conversations. At some point, it's like the high school president election. Like, you're going to only get so much out of that conversation. And in there, who can put together a quality cabinet? Who can put together quality people around them? No one mayor is going to solve any issue that we have here, or any president or any one city council person. And who are the folks that can put together really good teams and work with other people to solve, and also have this ability to be like front line to do it, is what I would add. At some point, once I heard one debate, I heard the 6th one, there's only so much that you're going to say, and then you're going to get talking points, even when you read. But knowing enough about city government, you need a team of people on a cabinet that's going to be with those people to help to make some of those public-private connections, to be able to have real credibility in neighborhoods, and was some of the things I started to think about after debate number 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah, you can't really assess leadership in all of its aspects by just listening to politicians debate.
Sure.
We could go on for another 10 hours, it seems like, with this group. And this has been such a fruitful and inspiring conversation. And we always like to ask, at the close of each show, and you all are, really filling these young people with a great sense of hope and future aspirations. And we want to ask you, the both of you, how do you remain hopeful in light of all the problems that, sometimes you oftentimes face in achieving social and racial equity and justice? What's your hope? How do you fill yourself with hope in this process?
As Ameen will tell you, I have an abundance of optimism. And
You too. I can vouch for that.
Yeah, and and I carry it fiercely and unapologetically. So I'm naturally bent toward being hopeful. But for me, and as I said, I don't get a lot of time with our coach mentors and with our young people, but what I do get is the ability to show people what it is that we're creating in Nicetown. And the energy that I derive from people who come and visit, a Kareem Thomas from the Reinvestment Fund who says to me, Kenny, I grew up 3 blocks from here. Black communities do not ordinarily receive this kind of investment. Mm-hmm. Although I'm raising my kids in the middle of Montgomery County, my son and daughter will be enrolled at PYB in this center, the first program cycle you all offer, right? It's that sense. It's Nikki Bagby on our board, also from Nicetown, and now lives in in Germantown, who has seen more violence and has been to more funerals of loved ones. And for her to come through and break out in tears, genuine emotion about the possibilities and the potential of what it is that we're doing. So for me, I really have this unique ability to kind of feed off of and sponge up off of the emotions and the perspectives of others, even though I'm working on behalf of young people. Different from Ameen, who really straddles this world of all that we're doing at a leadership level and an articulation level on behalf of young people, and then having the ability to be with young people and with coach mentors who are really our frontline folk.
I think, yeah, for me, it's a great question, and I reflect on it, like what keeps me hopeful. It's a part of my daily reflection, guys. And I mean that as a practice, right? Mm-hmm. I say the health and safety of the young person is tied to adults very intentionally, because I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about you all. I'm talking about people that run organizations, people that are involved in heavy racial and social justice conversations, people that look like me. Like, there's some internal practice that you just have to have, or the work where we live will beat you down, right? And that's reflection every day. The amount of conversation I've been in, cross-racial dialogues, affinity groups, at some point, it was like I was the subject of the work, I was trying to facilitate the work, and I was on my own spectrum of the work. And it was like, oh my God, so without daily reflection, the self-reflection keeps me hopeful. And I mean that as a practice. The right questions I ask myself: what was this day about? What did you feel? I try to tap into that. That keeps me hopeful. When I see my children, I'm a girl dad. When I see my children, when I hear somebody says, Mr. Ameen or Ak, that feeds my soul, And again, I led into it in the beginning, like, that validates the work on a piece of paper, right? Mm-hmm. And I got it a couple of times today in community, and it was like, okay, I remember you when, you remember me when. It was authentic, adults, young people. And then the second part is and Kenny nailed it for me also. It's what we have built and what we're building is the hopeful, because selfishly reminds me of how I grew up, reminds me of everybody that was ever important in my life. A pillar, like literally a physical pillar of the community, like we're building and built upon 8 years of work, and that has me infinitely hopeful. I joke with the team all the time. Like, that building's going to last well beyond anybody on this Zoom call right now. And I want to be the guy. I want to be like the old guy that's like 90, sitting in the corner, and somebody say, I think old head used to work here. That will tell me that there have been generations of human beings, generations of young Black and brown children and families that have come through that center. That came maybe because it's the nice new shiny thing, but the people kept them coming. And that's the thing that ultimately gets me, keeps me hopeful. The self-reflection, I need it every day. And then like what we've built and what we are continuing to build, that's going to be at the center, and the people that we're building it with.
Wow.
Those are really inspiring answers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
they really are.
Especially the self-reflecting part, because we are all in this together, and it's going to definitely take collective action. It can't be one or two people or one or two organizations running this race. And you all are just building like a real solid legacy. It's always a pleasure, being in your presence and seeing your team work with the young people and just doing all the great work that you do, despite the social challenges and adversities that you face. You still remain hopeful. This was just an awesome conversation. So, John, I don't know if you had any closing comments.
I just want to thank you both, and I feel like I've made a new friend. I mean,
listen, man.
Yeah, even though it's on Zoom.
I appreciate it. We did spend a couple of years because of the pandemic meeting new people on Zoom, and I can't wait to meet you all in person.
When I talked to Kenny about this, he said, "I'll do it, but I have to bring Ameen with me."
That was the one other thing that I was going to add. I was going to add that, and Kenny doesn't. I know he doesn't need me to say this about him, but like that self-reflection also happens with each other, and we carve out moments where we have conversation with each other.
That's important.
Kenny will affirm. I mean, you seeing it this way. Cool. What about this, Kenny? And that happens every day, and we're trying to make that even more. That keeps you hopeful as well, where you can be engaged authentically with people you care about and work with.
So the bottom line here is that we can be hopeful for the Sixers sometime in the future. Huh?
I'm gonna pull a Jesse Jackson on that one. We're gonna have to keep him alive.
Podcast that one.
Well, thank you to you both, Ameen and Kenny. Thank you for joining us for another powerful episode here on the Race to Social Justice podcast. Thank you to all of our listeners and our viewers on our YouTube channel. Please join us again for another courageous conversation in our Race to Social Justice. And remember, if you haven't already done so, please make sure you subscribe to our channel. And we appreciate you tuning in and listening to all these wonderful, wonderful conversations that we're having. So till next time, I'm Kiva White, the Black guy, and take good care.
Bye.
The Race to Social Justice podcast is produced, edited, and mixed at The Dream in Austin, Texas. Visit thedreamrecordingstudio.com for more info.